Hello, hello, hello. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so excited. Today we have Kathleen Cook, which is one of her and her husband, Phil Cook. We just love them. Kathleen lives in Hollywood. They're like our mentors. What are you, Kathleen?
Oh,
You're a producer, a media influencer, a minister. Her and her husband have a production company. They do projects all around the world. Just thank you for
yeah.
being on 21 Days of Happy. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here. So,
So tell us, oh, I did a bad job, but tell us quickly a little bit about yourself, right? And who you
yeah,
are and
sure.
kind of what you
Well,
do.
my husband and I own a production company, as you said, here in Hollywood, Cook Media Group, and Cook has an E on the end. Some people call me
Right.
Cookie,
Okay.
but it's Cook. So Cook Media Group, and
Okay.
we've had our production company here since 1991. So it's just
Okay.
a little time. And then we also co-founded and produce within our nonprofit called the Influence Lab. And I
Okay.
particularly focus on women
Wow.
within that nonprofit, helping them use media more effectively.
Okay.
So that's, Cook Media Group, we've done production, we've done Super Bowl spots to feature
Right.
films
Right.
to working with large ministries and nonprofits around the world. So
Right.
we keep our
Right.
tennis shoes on.
Yeah. So you like me, we're in LA and we've been quarantined. I don't know what, like
Uh,
7. I'm losing count now. What, like
yeah,
7?
I don't even want to think
Right.
about how long I've been quarantined. It's
So
all good though, you know what? It's
yeah.
all good. I feel like God's given me a time to, we're normally on the road quite a bit, and
Wow.
we were in 8 countries in the fall, and we're
Oh wow. Okay. Okay.
scheduled for 8 this spring. So it's kind of nice for me being home, but I'll tell you, it's not been less crazy. It's
Right.
been, and now that everybody's online, everyone's doing media, everybody needs help, and
Right.
so we're there.
Right. I mean, I was so excited to do this interview with you today and kind of really digging a little into happiness because, hey,
Yeah.
Edwina and I are having these talks. I'm having these talks with myself, like, what do I want to do next? Am I happy? Uh, and then I listen to the news and then I get all riled up, right? So I'm sure a lot of people are kind of there, like just reevaluating where they are in life, reevaluating what makes them happy, right? So this is a great interview today. So what do you think? Can you speak to us a little bit? What have you found as kind of a media producer and consultant uh, about happiness? What are some of your discoveries?
Yeah, well, it's right up my alley
Yeah.
because if,
Okay.
as a producer, I have to produce content to
Okay.
keep people happy
Yeah.
or that they're going to want to watch. Because if
Right.
I if I don't produce content that's gonna resonate with them,
Yeah.
then
Right.
I failed, right?
Yeah.
So either I produce content that's from an educational point of view that's going to help them grow in learning and grow in
Yeah.
wisdom and understanding, or I produce an entertainment type film or project that can actually divert their attention from a time from where they are and kind of get them out of what I call the hamster wheel,
Yeah.
they're
Sure.
on in
Yeah.
life,
Right.
and divert their attention. So for me as a producer, one of the things that I focus on most is studying audience and studying specifically the
Okay.
future and what they're going to want to watch
Yeah.
and
Interesting.
what's going to make them happy.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. That totally makes sense, right? So I'm sure in like studying audiences and creating content. What I don't know. What do you think? Like me, I read the news. I was in advertising at one point, right?
Sure.
So I love like reading about trends, what people are talking about, what's trending on Twitter or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, like where do you think people are right now?
Well, Kelvin, I think the first thing that you have to understand from what I study and what futurists tell us is that we have to understand the difference between what a pandemic that we've been going through
Okay.
recently, or a disaster, sometimes whether it would be from a health point of view disaster, financial disaster
Right.
possibly coming up,
Yeah.
a health, financial, even a natural disaster,
Right.
that these many times are what we call disruptions,
Okay.
not a trend. So
Okay.
I study futurists about what actually changes our behavior,
Oh, okay.
what changes the actual direction. It's interesting, I just read an article this week from Andy Crouch, who was the editor of Christianity Today. He said, he likens the difference between us going through a winter blizzard and going through what he looks at post COVID-19 to be the ice age. In other words, there's no going back. There's no disruptions actually change how we think, how we live our lives, how we focus on our careers and our lives. So understanding, first of all, that concept that COVID-19 is not going to be a trend. It's actually a disruption right now. And so how has that actually focused or changed our focus and our lifestyle?
Okay.
And certainly as we talk about happiness, then we have taken the time, because we've all been isolated in quarantine,
Right.
to start thinking about these things. What actually makes me happy?
Yeah.
What actually do I want to do with the rest of my life once I can start emerging again that will make me happy? Right. And what things do I want to leave behind that really has not brought me happiness in the past? And so where does, what is this word happiness all about? And how do we find it basically in new ways? Right. How has COVID changed our perspective on that? So one of the things that I study, a couple interesting things.
This is all fascinating, by the way. So please, I'm all ears.
Yeah. So one of the things that I study, again with futurists, is just understanding, the culture in the world. In 2018, the UK hired for the first time its first minister of loneliness, because there were so many people in their land, in their country, that were so depressed and unhappy and lonely. Japan, pre-COVID-19, their biggest problem they had in Japan at the time was the number of aging older people that were dying in their homes by themselves and not found for weeks until the stench finally came out. And trying to deal with how to help the aging population within Japan not be so lonely. The Surgeon General within our own country here in the United States likens the rise in depression rates and loneliness rates in our country in the last few years to having health issues equal to someone smoking 15 packs of cigarettes a day.
Are you serious?
So we're not talking about just a United States problem. We're talking about a real global problem here. And what's caused that? So in studying that, of course, in the world I live in, is technology and science. And I love your title of this session, The Science of Happiness, because that is what we, in our world and our culture today, want to study. We reach out into science and we reach out into technology to solve our problems. Right now, we're reaching to science to bring us a cure for COVID-19, and we're reaching out actually in technology. App designers right now are scrambling to find apps and to create apps so that when our phone gets close to someone else's phone, that it will pick up whether somebody has a temperature, pick up whether or not somebody is sick, and that we can, or even put off some kind of a warning sign to us, which is be very, very interesting. And of course, all of this is going to be totally new. The other thing that we look at is biomedics, the insertion of our technology into our bodies.
Okay.
We now panic when we can't find our cell phone. We are teaching our young babies. My grandma actually at this point, believe it or
You
not.
don't look like a grandma.
I can't believe it
Okay.
myself.
No.
I have grandchildren, and my 2-year-old grandchild knew how to manipulate a cell phone by the age of 2.
Wow.
And knew the importance of them just by watching their mom and dad, their grandparents, all of us, and the focus that we have on that. So they knew there was something in that little square thing that was going to bring this connection, that had this life force within it. And so studying all that then reflects on how has this science and the technology then infected our lives in much more greater sense than COVID-19. And will, because we're tired of dropping our cell phones in the toilet and breaking our screens and carrying them through airports. We're going to just insert them into our bodies and have these clouds around us that we're going to be walking around kind of doing this, pushing things away from us on these clouds. If you saw Minority Report, that movie, there's a perfect example of it. And so that is going to change us, and it's going to come fast. I mean, look how fast the pandemic came in and changed now our world and culture.
It's like overnight.
We're living in that kind of thing. And then I think that's what's the most fearful thing that we are actually feeling at this point is, how can I keep my tennis shoes tight enough to keep up with this changing science and technology?
Right.
And so in looking at that, I began studying many of the people who study technology and how its effects on us. Dr. Jean Twenge at the University of San Diego has done extensive research into young people, particularly because they are the biggest consumers of technology. You know, we know, if something breaks or you don't know how to do something, just go ask your teenage son, right? He'll teach you. So, or your grandchild, whatever. But she studied the young people. She studied the basically the 13 to 20-year-olds is her hood, so to speak. And she's discovered a few things that technology actually has increased our depression rates, because we look at it as a substitute for a relationship. We look at it as something that will temporarily make us happy, but it doesn't in the long term make us happy. So they've done studies on taking their cell phones or their smartphones away from teenagers for a period of time and watching the depression rates fall. And then giving them back to them and seeing those depression rates, rise again. So what are they doing when they're not having their cell phone? They are being engaged with real people. They are reading. They are thinking. They are creative. We've used our cell phones as a sense of boredom killers. We use our cell phone to keep us from getting bored. We can't even stand in line anymore without pulling our cell phone out, because we got to do something, instead of just being bored standing in line and looking around. In fact, police are saying that crime rates have gone up because nobody's paying attention to what's going on around them anyway to report anything or to intercept anything that might be happening. It's very interesting. Our face is in our cell phones. But Twenge talks about how the happiness of young people has dramatically changed. In fact, the rates of depression actually doubled from the inception of the cell phone, which is about 2004, to at present day. They continue to double. And then, of course, there's the study from Harvard University with Dr. Robert Wallinger. It's just so fascinating. If no one's watched that, that's a TED Talk. That I would definitely look at. And he he is kind of the overseer of a 75-year-old plus long research study that Harvard has done on happiness. And the conclusions that they've come through. They've been studying what makes people happy since 1938. And it's an incredible story. It's the longest study or research study that's ever been happened. And it's been on happiness.
Right.
Because
what they find?
Well, it's so interesting because they did find, I think overall there was one major thing came out of that. First of all, they asked people, what makes you happy? And of course, 80% of them said wealth. Wealth makes me happy. Or 50% of the population said, well, fame would make me happy. But when it came down to it, within their study, it wasn't wealth, it wasn't fame that actually made people happy, made them healthier even, made them even mentally more cognitive. It was their relationships with people. Good relationships was the single most prevalent thing, most important thing. A good relationship actually brought people more happiness than fame or fortune, winning the lottery, all of those things.
Wow. Who did that?
Very, very interesting. And the three things I think that's really came out of it that's really quite fascinating is that he discovered that, let me look at my notes here.
Yeah, sure.
He, here it is. He said that there were three key factors that came out of it. That first of all, your relationships had to be close. You had to have a close relationship with a family or a friend or someone meaningful in your life. That had to be a close relationship with them. The second part of it is that it had to be a quality relationship, not quantity, but quality.
Right.
And what's interesting about his study too is in 2015, they did an off study on 20-somethings because for the first time they saw that 20-somethings actually found that quantity over quality relationships mattered. Why? Because in about that time is when social media stuff stepped in and all of the trending stuff steps in, and the 20-somethings, they got to have those numbers.
How many followers do I have?
How many followers do I have? But then it shifted back at age 30. At age 30 then, they went back into wanting quality relationships rather than quantity. And the third factor that he discovered, that he said that the study discovered through these 75 years, longest study ever, is that it has to do with a marriage, but not necessarily if it had to be a good marriage, one that was connecting, was committed and supportive to each other. In other words, it didn't matter if you were in a marriage situation and were unhappy. That kind of took you out of the study. But if you were in a marriage relationship that was committed, supported, contractual, that you were in it for life, no matter what, and because you cared and were supportive of that person, that it not only gave you more happiness, it increased your lifespan and increased your mental capacities. And so I think those three factors, so it all comes down to relationship, doesn't it? You know, that's what we want. As a producer, when I produce something, and what we're doing right now is I'm wanting you to create with our relationship right now, some kind of connection. So it's not just the fact that we have knowledge within ourselves and the wisdom that we want to share, but the fact that we care. We care about that person that's watching right now. We care about what we're doing with our lives so that we can then help them become better people and more happy themselves. So it's all about that strong relationship. And so technology and science provides us with those momentary, temporary bits that we can find that kind of connection. The problem is, Kelvin, it doesn't last.
It doesn't last.
It doesn't.
Tell me about it, Kathleen. Yeah.
You know, science and technology is going to find a cure for this COVID-19, but what about COVID-20 and
Yeah.
COVID-21? And science and technology is going to help us with, you know, finding out the temperature of the person standing next to us for a time. But how is that going to affect our personal space, our privacy, all of those kind of things?
Yeah.
And ultimately, what we call Big Brother, the government overseeing us constantly. I mean, I think that's probably our biggest fear, for me at least, even as a citizen in the United States, is that my freedoms are going to start going away, and that they've already have been taken away in many senses during COVID-19. So the stats, so we still can't get away though from having that cell phone, right? We have to have that connection, because that's the world we live in right now, whether it's going to be in our wrist or it's going to be an actual device that we carry around with us. This, you know, statistics tell us right now that there are more cell phones in the world than there are people. Many of us have more than one cell phone. There are more cell phones in India than they have toilets. And believe me, I have been to India and they need toilets. A Maasai warrior in the deepest part of Africa has more access to information on his cell phone, and he has one, than the President of the United States had just 10 years ago. And the average child in America right now gets a cell phone in the United States, gets one at 9 years of age, globally at 12 years of age. So they are connected. That is that connection device. But again, we've seen that technology and science solve us problems temporarily. We might say they trend, but they're not going to help us in the long run with the dilemma of our consumption and usage of those things. So how do we move forward? How do we understand how much usage to use? Well, science and technology and research, again, has shown that when we are using our phone outside of educational purposes for an hour a day, that it really doesn't affect our lives that much. When we start using our cell phone as teenagers to do, the average teenager today is on their cell phone 5 hours a day. 5 hours. We check our text messages, our cell phone, on average of 150 times a day.
No, we check our cell phones average.
And kids, they were in school at the time, and I'm sure that they've caught up with us at the 150 mark. But when kids were in school, not supposed to be on their phone, they checked them still 85 times a day. That was the average.
Oh,
so
no.
we're there. But as we know, this science and technology is only going to satisfy us for a time. We ultimately want that long connected relationship.
Yeah.
And when we get off that phone, when they're, you know, that research showed that when those cell phones were taken away from those kids, that changed their happiness levels. It changed their depression. It changed their relationships with each other. And so that's the first thing we have to do, is get back into a real relationship. I think that's the most important.
Yeah. How do we do that? I mean, because it just feels as though well, let me just speak for myself, but it feels like a lot of times I'm addicted. Like, I was reading this study where the little sounds when I get a message or a text create endorphins. It's almost to the effect of like dopamine in my brain, right? And it's designed to keep me, it's designed to be habitual.
Yeah, exactly.
To your point. So,
yeah,
sometimes I just have to say, I'm going to take a break from the cell phone for a day or whatever the case may be. But how do we stop? It's not good for us. It's not good for us long term. I got it. Right? So, what do we do?
We're getting back again to what we're really searching for, is happiness, right?
Yeah.
We're using our cell phones to avoid maybe thinking about stuff we don't want to avoid.
Right.
Our boredom, we use our cell phones to avoid
Yeah.
our boredom.
Right.
We're using our cell phones as this crutch when actually what our soul is craving is that need for happiness. You know, what I've always said is the world or our culture promises us happiness, which is just temporary. You know, when we die, when we're done with one thing, we're ready for the next thing. You know, whatever thing we've wanted in our lives, whether it be a new car or a new house or a new whatever, dress or shoes or whatever, once we get them, research shows us that our happiness levels, our depression rates go back down. You know, and so it's temporary. Happiness, what the world promises, is temporary. But what God, the Father who created us, I'm a Christian, and so my life is based on a foundation of a relationship with Him.
Right.
That is, to me, my root relationship that was shown in this Harvard study to be the most important thing. It's the relationship you have. And where is that relationship first in? For me, I find it in God, my creator.
Right.
And so I not only am going to receive, I believe, and have received unending happiness, and in what is really what I consider even more from God, which is joy. Yeah. The world promises happiness. God, I believe, for me, I have found, has given me and promised me joy,
Right.
Exceeding joy. And that, even in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of destruction and disasters, there is joy to be found when you know that your root relationship that has said to you, I will never leave or forsake you, I will always be with you, is going to be there.
Yeah.
You know, as prisoners of COVID, you know, we've been prisoners in our home. We are never alone. You know, I think it's interesting to research and to study prisoners of wars, POWs, and the ones that have come out have had that spiritual relationship and that connection to God that has actually brought them through. You know, the world, for instance, and our culture teaches us some things that we can do to actually bring temporary happiness to our lives. We can create rituals around us, you know, certain routines. One of the first things that I watched when COVID started was a psychologist talking about the disconnection that we are all feeling from COVID.
Right.
And that most important thing that we could do was to create these ongoing rituals, ongoing schedule. Get up, you know, take a shower, get dressed, you know, go through our normal day, and to keep those rituals going, that was going to help us. Then the culture and psychologists in our world today also tell us that we can express gratitude to people. We can say, we can be thankful for where we are. You know, I'm definitely happy that I have a house to live in rather than a tiny little apartment. My daughter's in New York City right now in a little tiny apartment in Brooklyn, 600 square feet. It's tough, you know, so gratitude. She's grateful for her mom calling her every day and seeing how she's doing, you know, gratefulness. These are all little steps that we can do temporarily. We can set meaningful goals in our lives. That's a temporary step that can keep us toward happiness.
Sure.
We can focus more on our strengths than our weaknesses. That's another one. We can also simplify our lives, get all the junk around us away and keep things a little bit more simple. And I think all of us have been feeling a little bit of that during COVID-19. But these, again, are steps that are temporary. God calls us, again, if he wants, he says to us, if you really want to find more than temporary happiness, but eternal joy, here's the 3 steps that I'm going to tell you you're going to need to know.
Okay.
His first step, he says, is to know him. We have to know God. We can't just, you know, think we're going to go to church when COVID's over 19. We can't just watch a preacher on TV. We just can't listen to some great praise music or Christian music or whatever, you know, spiritual music that you have. That's not going to be. we have to personally engage in prayer and in Bible reading. We have to be personally engaged and know God. How can we hear God's heart and spirit, which I believe I do? I hear his heart and spirit in my life all the time. How can we do that if we're not personally engaged with him? So knowing God is the most important thing. The second thing we have to do out of knowing is to make the choice that I'm going to do that. Choose him because he's chosen us. He's created us. He chose us for connection. Go back to Genesis 1. We were created for his joy. We were created by our creator God for connection and relationship, the bottom root of everything. And so when we choose then to know him, then we choose then to care. We care whether or not that we're connected to him, and he then allows us to care for others. That's where our love comes in. That's where our caring for others comes in. And then finally, the third step I believe God calls us is he calls us to share. He calls us to share him with himself with others. Because I know that when I've been in a love relationship, when I first started dating my husband, I couldn't stop talking about him. When I had my first baby, I can't stop talking about my babies today, even though they've grown up. When we're in those love, caring, strong relationships that Harvard study proved are important, we have to share them with others. In fact, in 1 John 1:4 in the Bible, it says that we are to share him, and that when we share him, that our joy is complete. That our joy is complete. And so first of all, I believe there are some practical things that the world can teach us, that our culture, that science, that technology can teach us. I'm all for it. But to find that eternal joy, that eternal peace, that eternal happiness, we have to go to the source. And that's God the Father, our creator.
That's right on. Just as you're talking, just to put it into some practicality, I remember when COVID-19 started, like back in March, and couple of things. I mean, my household is busy with my wife. We're running around, but then everything started shutting down, right? And we were like kind of freaking out. And my wife Edwina was like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" or what have you. But then we went into prayer, right? We all the things you're saying, we found scripture, we prayed or whatever, and it had a way of kind of centering us or grounding us and saying, hey, and after a while, we're like, hey, everything is going to be okay. And that's what I love. I mean, I'm a Christian, and I'll tell everyone that's what I love about my faith, is because no matter what happens, I know that everything is going to be okay, right? And and that's a great thing. And the second thing about relationship, I have a great story. We were quarantined, and quarantine, I don't know, it was like week 4, and Edwina was like, hey, I have a very large family on the East Coast. She was like, why don't you do a Zoom family reunion? So I was like, and when she said it, I was like, yes. So I reached out to all my family through social media or whatever, emails, calling. But anyway, we had a huge kind of Zoom family reunion with like 70 people. And it was amazing. It was like amazing, but just that kind of being hunkered down in quarantine, just that feeling of connection, it was just like really, really special. and I'm getting a little choked up even talking about it, but my aunts and cousins are still texting me. It was like, that was amazing, or whatever. But I think my point is, I think you're spot on with what you're saying. Like, I forget how important connection is to my soul,
Yeah.
right? Into my soul. And even if we're quarantined or have restrictions, there are ways to your point, put the phone down or whatever and connect with our family around us.
Right.
Because
Yes.
that's what really counts. Yeah, or through
Yeah.
Zoom or what have you. So I think it's really important what you're saying, right? I mean, like science and technology, they're tools, right? And they're designed for us to use for us to use, but not for them to be the master over us, right?
That's exactly right.
And I think that's when we kind of get into issues when when technology
Yeah.
becomes the master. Like I'll choose my I'll choose myself the time of my cell phone over my wife or whatever the case may be. So, oh, this is good stuff,
Exactly right.
Kathleen. I mean, we
And
could,
I think, COVID too has taught us all the importance of small things that we can do for people
right?
in
Yeah,
relationships,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
especially whether it be just writing a note to someone and putting it in the snail
Yeah,
mail, the
yeah, oh,
old-fashioned
yeah,
box,
yeah. Right,
know,
right,
or
right.
picking up the phone and just talking to somebody on the phone rather than texting.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
No,
there is a connection there, and certainly, our devices and our technology, I have allowed us to actually survive, I think, more than anything
yeah, sure.
through this isolation, so much more than we ever could have without it. But we can't allow it to rule our lives. And it'll be interesting to see when we start emerging how our usage of technology will change.
Right.
Whether or not we will use it more because we've gotten used to using it more, or whether or not we will actually have it at a distance a little bit more and cherish those real times of being together, putting cell phones down. If you go out for coffee or dinner with somebody, take the cell phone and keep it off the table,
Right. That's right.
So much, so important with that. It's interesting too, Kelvin, and I can kind of maybe just leave you with this one thought and one
Yeah,
story too, in that I made mention, that for so many people I talked to, they felt prisoners in their home, and they still feel a bit of a prisoner. And then certainly, I just finished reading the new Hollywood rules of production that we're going to have to use once this all emerges, and it's pretty daunting.
Wow.
And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of changes in our world and culture today, and so that's going to make us feel even more for us to grieve our loss of freedom, and to make us feel like we're still kind of prisoners in our where we are. So I again, was reading some books and came across an underground interview with an Iranian prisoner who'd been in isolation for over 7 years for sharing Jesus with someone.
Okay.
In Iran, they're not allowed to share anything other than, what is the state religion, which is Muslims. They have to be a Muslim. And if you share Jesus, you can be thrown into prison. And so he repeatedly was sharing Jesus, and they threw him into prison for 7 years. And now he's serving 2 years in exile in an undisclosed nation. So how they were able to even do this Skype interview with him was pretty amazing and get it out. But in saying all that, one of the last questions the interviewer asked him in the interview is, so you're just about, at the end of this exile, are you going to escape? Are you going to get out of Iran, get out of that religious persecution and the torture you've been through? And he said, absolutely not. He said, if I leave, who's going to be there to tell them about who Jesus is? Who's going to be there to be able to tell the story. And that, again, goes back to those three that God calls us to do: to know him, and certainly this prisoner knows him, to care very deeply about not just ourselves, but care about others, and to share Jesus. And that out of that, you couldn't believe the joy that you could actually feel through the screen that was coming from this prisoner still in exile, of the joy that he has in being able to tell people about the joy that lives within him, and the happiness that he has found in the joy, the secret of life, of eternal life, not just temporary life here on earth. Because we may die. We may die from COVID. We may die from something else. We may get hit by a car tomorrow. Who knows? But we know where we're headed in the end, and we know where our joy comes from. And it isn't in this world, and it isn't in the stuff around us. It's in our root relationship with God. And then all of that then allows us to have deeper relationships with our family, with our friends, and have joy, So that
was great, Kathleen. So before we end today, how does one follow you? I guess social media or your website?
Yeah, love that. So they can sign up for my bi-monthly journal that I produce called the Influence Women's Journal. And that's okay if you're a guy. I have a lot of guys reading it these days. So you go to influencelab.com for the Influence Lab, and then you'll see the women's section up at the top, and you can click on journal or go to influencelab.com and then /journal take you right there to the sign up. It's a bi-monthly journal. I focus on culture and media and faith, and recommend books that can be read every month, videos to watch, thought that hopefully can help you navigate your world and culture around you. And I do an interview, an INNERVIEW, an interview with someone working in media or entertainment on how God has influenced their life and worked within their career. And then I also produce a weekly blog at KathleenCook.com. So they can go to my website and they'll see the blog site there. And again, Cook has an E on the end. I'm Cookie, COOKE. So Kathleen with a K, KathleenCook.com. And social media, I'm at Kathleen Official on Instagram and Facebook. And then the Influence Lab Women is also available for you to connect into as well. So those are all there. You'll pop into all of them once you get into one. So that's how it works.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen, for just taking time to talk with us today. It was a great discussion on the science of happiness, and it just makes me. I definitely want to spend some even more time with my wife and daughters, and so just thank you. It was a lot of good.
It's just been a joy being with you as well, Kelvin.
Okay, take care.
Like those babies.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.